Good morning, welcome. Welcome to the 2023 Community Forum. Big day. I'm very pleased to see you all this morning. Thank you for being here on time. Everybody on Zoom, welcome. I'm Micah Russell, the director of the Master in Environmental Management Program, and it's a real privilege to kick this off. This is my favorite time of year, when we get to celebrate the accomplishments of both our MEM students as well as our MS Ecology students. And I'm not going to say much because we have a lot to do today, a lot of folks to hear from, and we want to stay on time. But I will say that this is a celebration. It is not meant to be an intimidating forum. Many of our students do in fact have the chance to present at other conferences, longer form venues. Really what we're doing here today are small presentations that give us a glimpse of what they accomplished during their time at Western. It certainly doesn't allow for the full story, but we're eager to check in with everyone to see what some of the most important findings from their work was and some of the people they worked for. So here we go. I'm going to invite Ricardo onto stage, Dr. Ricardo Vasquez Perales, who will talk to us about the format for today.
Yeah, and congratulations, everyone. We waited for this moment for long, and I will tell you especially the logistics that we are going to have throughout the day. So we have several panels, and then we want to be time efficient also to enjoy it. And then for each panel, we have 4 presenters and sometimes 5 presenters. In between each panel, we have a break. So in each panel, then we have an introduction of 5 minutes that our panelists will do, and then the transition to the first panelist. And the first panelist and all panels will have 12 minutes for their presentation, and then we have 2 more minutes for 2 Q&A, and 1 minute for transition for the next panelist. Panelists will have control of their presentations here, so they will be advancing their own presentation, having a clicker. After the 4 panelists present, then we have 9 minutes Q&A and 1 minute for transition for the next panel. And if we do this, helping each other together, we can accomplish the result. And then we will have a break at 9:35 to 9:45, and that will be the format. So let's start this first panel, which is assessing for the future, technical solutions for collaborative management, with Catherine Escamilla, Jojo Matson at distance, Kat Finnerty, and Nicholas Story. The floor is yours.
The panelists standing before you have spent time this past year working and learning in the places now known as California, Utah, Florida, and Nigeria. But thousands of years before our feet walked on these lands, the original ancestors were there, cultivating life, creating, and growing with the land, not only in these places, but everywhere in between. And the physical evidence of their inhabitants is a finite resource for all cultures. Modern civilization sees archaeological artifacts as the window giving us a glimpse into past ways of practicing life, and the direct descendants see them as the umbilical cord tying themselves and their ancestors to these sacred lands.
Like a song known by memory, we can heal the land by reconnecting through tradition. The Colorado Plateau brings life into an arid landscape like a beating heart. The rainbow sands and stones that rise and fall have been etched slowly by the patient hand of time. Drop by drop, grain by grain, the path of life travels towards the sea to return once again as a drop. Tucked away hidden in the bends of canyons are the echoes of those that call this place home. Signs of their relationship with the land still vibrating off the walls. Knowledge so deep and beautiful that it has survived millennia intact. A message of balance and connectivity that cannot translate to numbers and dollars. Despite the connection being seemingly severed by the decisions of boundaries and resource use, the connections of knowledge to systems that once were are alive in communities across the country and globe. One thing remains true: water is life.
From the Colorado River to the Niger Delta, land managers face decisions that require collaboration of many different stakeholders. This is done in the hope that a forward-thinking solution can prepare us for the problems that we face together. Unfortunately, many times we've had to learn from our mistakes. We've had to learn that mitigation and preparation is an investment in our future, as well as our way to connect with the land. As land managers, policymakers, assessors, scientists, and advocates for a healthy environment, it is our responsibility to ensure that the images you see right here do not occur again. We do this through analysis, collaboration, through developing methods to assess and managing our realities. It is also a responsibility to pass on what we have learned from our experiences, to share them with the next generation so that our mistakes can be avoided and mitigated in the future.
Right now, we have the opportunity to push our limits and create meaningful change in order to protect our Earth for those who will come after us. But eventually, there will come a point at which we will have to pass the torch on to others. Involving and educating the next generations to make decisions based in science, understanding, and love will help to encourage the positive change that the panelists before you truly believe in. The decisions that we make today will have an impact on our world, and it is this knowledge that has been the guiding force behind the work that each of us has done. Though the project that this panel presents are all drastically different, it is the understanding that collaboration and education will define what happens in our future that connects us. So, without further ado, I introduce the first presenter of today, Catherine Escamilla, with her project titled Moving Parts in the Channel Islands, Protecting Resources While Planning for a Wilderness Designation. Okay, well, no, it's okay. I just feel it. All right, sorry guys. Thank you, Kat. All right, moving parts on the Channel Islands. I'm sure some of you are wondering where exactly these islands are. So here's a map for reference. The Channel Islands lie off the coast of Southern California in between Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. And this right here, just the fact that this park encompasses 5 islands is a huge component that goes into what makes management so challenging and fun. Once you get out to the islands, there are so many different people working on different projects, so many moving parts happening all at once. And these islands really have historically set the stage for many moving parts. I'd like to acknowledge that they are Chumash homelands. The Chumash were out there for thousands of years before, and they were the original movers on the islands. They moved in between the islands themselves and in between the islands and the mainland, and they were the stewards of these lands. They cared for the land, and in the 1800s, they were removed from the land.
After this happened, the island went through a period of time where extensive ranching operations occurred. And again, people were moved among the islands and between the islands and the mainland, and also livestock and non-native species. So this was an extremely destructive time for the islands. And since the end of that era, it has been the mission of the National Park Service to bring responsible stewardship back to these islands. So part of this responsible stewardship is happening through our visitor use impact monitoring. Why is monitoring necessary? It allows us, or it gives us awareness of potential impacts that can occur to our resources on the islands. And once we have that awareness, then we can take the necessary steps to mitigate impacts, better protect the resources, uphold our wilderness character. And all of these things really just go into preserving the islands for future generations. So some of the tools that I've been using to implement this monitoring for the park have been trail counters and cameras. Both of these tools enhance the park's capacity for monitoring because they work 24/7. They can be placed in areas like strategically placed, and they can be hidden or camouflaged. And they operate at a lower cost and have a lower impact to the environment and wilderness character if you were to weigh them against sending an actual person out into the field. Another tool that I have developed has been through Survey 123, and that's what this QR code is up here. And it's an online tool that can be downloaded onto a tablet or a mobile device and then taken out into the field. So I'll get into that. Survey 123. I didn't have much experience with that before I developed this for the park. And that just kind of is a nod to how user-friendly it is. It was also very easy to use once we got out into the field. And yeah, something that is really great is that it can be downloaded onto these devices and you can trust the reliability of it when you have to drive an hour to your site or hike 4 miles. You really need to be able to access what you need on these devices. And then the impacts, once we get out to these sites that we're looking for, are trash, human waste, illegal campfires, out of bounds camping, and social trails. So before I get into the monitoring of social trails, I just wanted to show you some of the preliminary trail mapping that we did. I joined a team of resource specialists on Santa Rosa Island, and with their help and the help of some data layers that we use to reference sensitive resources like threatened and endangered species and archaeological sites, we were able to move around these areas and identify trails that needed to be closed, trails that needed to be realigned, and areas where travel needed to be restricted to on trail only. This was done to protect resources. And then in another area, we were able to navigate around resources and actually insert a new trail segment that creates a loop at this popular day hike area. And this slide is just a teaser because I want you all to come visit the Channel Islands, but these are some on the ground photos of those areas that were in the previous maps. So back to monitoring the social trails. Social trails have high impacts to the environment. They bring, or they have the potential to bring non-native species into areas where they wouldn't previously be found, and they create erosion. So it was really important to have a way to capture these out on the island so that they can be recorded and monitored and restored. So this social trail monitoring is a separate function on the assessments, and I have it built in so that you can record as many segments of social trail as you need, or as many as you happen to find. And then there's this visual criteria guide that was, this is the standard for our park, and I put that on here so that the user can have a guide to assess the condition of the severity of the trails, and it's just keeping everything consistent
when monitoring these trails. So the next tool that I mentioned earlier was our trail counters. We were able to get 10 Traffics trail counters for this monitoring effort. And Traffics is the brand that is most widely used and trusted by public land managing agencies. The Tahoe Rim Trail Association has used it. I've seen the BLM out in Red Rock Canyon use it also. And these things they're really slick. So they are low profile and they have this infrared beam, they have a low profile scope with an infrared beam, and basically they take account each time that beam is interrupted. So they're best placed on a narrow section of trail where people are forced to walk in a single file line. And then we're able to get counts of visitor traffic in the backcountry. So yeah, we've got 10 of them deployed on Santa Rosa and Santa Cruz Islands. We found that the best way to check the accuracy is to send an intern out into the field and hand count people for a few hours as they're walking by. So that was also part of my field work. And yeah, that's a little bit about what these counters are and how they operate. So what can we learn from them? So the counters, like I mentioned, they give us insight into how the visitors are moving around in the backcountry. And that just helps the management team make informed decisions about where we can possibly add new trails or camping areas, or also where closures might be necessary. So that brings me to the last tool that we used for our visitor impact monitoring, which is cameras. The tribe identified some sensitive areas that the park agreed needed to be closed off. So we were able to get 2 cameras, and you can see the locations of the cameras and the closures in the trail on this map here. But we decided to put the cameras within the closures so that we could see if visitors are paying attention to the signs of the closure and adhering to it, and if that closure is enough to protect the resource, or the cameras will tell us if we need to be doing more to protect those resources. And I think just concentrating the efforts in one area will give us more valuable data than if we were to put one camera in this area and then another camera on the other side of the island. And we also have a trail counter in this area. So doing all of this monitoring in an area that was specifically of concern with the tribe will only strengthen the park's relationship with them. And then all of the data that we're gathering here will help the management team with their adaptive management and just help us better protect our resources out on the islands and enhance the visitor experience. So again, I want to acknowledge that the Channel Islands are Chumash ancestral homelands, and I want to thank Laura Kern and Sean Picton, Ulysses Huerta and Rocky Rudolph, and everyone at Channel Islands for all of their help and just being an amazing community. And thank you to Sally and all of you for being here. And yeah. Any questions?
What did you find with the cameras on the blocked off areas? Were people still going in there, or were there any surprises in the cameras in general?
So I was actually just able to get those set up 2 weeks ago. So that will be something that we'll be looking at in the future. It was a really rough winter, and logistics of getting out to the islands and doing work out there were pretty hard. So that's something that will be really exciting to find out.
Did you live on the islands or did you have to commute every day?
So we go out for typically like an 8-day tour, and there's housing on the islands for us. So the commute does happen, but not every day. Yeah.
I noticed, I think it was 2 slides ago, said something about like the tribes provided like input on something. I think Jojo will talk a lot about that, the interactions there. I'm wondering what that was like at the Channel Islands. Is it is the institution or the management or the national park, is there a Chumash like representative on it, or how does that work?
So thank you for that. So my community sponsors, Laura and Sean, and then our archaeologist, Kristen, they have gone through the training to be the ones to interact with the tribes. And so when they get together, it's kind of like a government to government meeting. And that's where they kind of like share what we are planning on doing. And then the tribes can also voice their concerns in those meetings. And I believe those happen once a month. Or yeah, I believe it's once a month, and it's pretty regular.
With that, we can pass to the next.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
We know when you guys are ready. And Catherine, you have my clicker, correct? Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jordan, or Jojo Matson, and I'm here to present the work I've been doing with the Navajo Nation Heritage and Historic Preservation Department. Over the past year, I've been working on a Navajo resource monitoring program in the Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Program. Next slide. This program is a large coalition of different tribal governments, federal agencies, state agencies, environmental groups, recreational groups, and contractors that have interests in the impacts that Glen Canyon Dam operation has on resources within the Grand Canyon and Colorado River. Next slide. An adaptive management program is great. It creates a lot of opportunity for collaboration, communication, and different ways of knowing. But there is a problem because we're managing a disconnected river. There are compounding different obstacles, like management issues that compartmentalize and quantitate data instead of understanding qualitative connections to that data. There are boundary and jurisdiction issues and policy and regulation limits that create lots of obstacles. These are stressed by more climate issues that are increased by socio-ecological impacts that add to those. And then we have cultural conflicts, environmental justice issues, displacement from ancestral landscapes, and loss of language and traditional ways of knowing. Next slide, please. We're managing this landscape with a Western view. We have complex relationships and management relationships that have restrictions and regulations based off of lots of data in law cases and legislation. These are government to government, national, interstate, and local relationships. Next slide. So what my program hopes to do is to build new relationships. We hope to establish interagency guidelines to create collaborative management relationships, direct research and management to include Indigenous-led research, create a knowledge base for tribal community members to learn, and reestablish connection to the land to promote traditional connections and well-being once again. Next slide. So we do that in two different avenues. The first being knowledge as a practice. Every year we go on annual river trips in the Grand Canyon, which I will be leaving for mine in literally 20 minutes after this trip. So on these trips, we take special care to choose who goes on them so that we have the right people to have the conversations, the scientists, and the knowledge on the landscape to be able to have the conversations on what's going on. We also take special care to bring tribal elders and youth together to learn in the place. Next slide. So we do this at different stops along the river. We have planned stops with specific locations, and we have stops that happen along the way with different encounters. This is one of the stops, the Salt Cave in the Grand Canyon. So this is a great opportunity to show the junction of different ecosystem services, both culturally and ecologically speaking. The connection to those resources is the main purpose that we're trying to change the way that monitoring is done down in the river. Not so much just the resource and what's being impacted, but what that means to connection to that. This place is really important to the Navajo Nation. For many generations, connection to this location in the Grand Canyon has been used to collect salt for traditional and ceremonial purposes, as well as nutritional purposes. So I would like to reframe ecosystem services in a different way and create a system of knowing through cultural services. Next slide. One cultural service being ceremonial continuity and well-being. As I said, we stop at the salt caves and gather salt. Here's the salt we gathered last year. So there are many different reasons and purposes for the salt being used, but one of them, which is one of my favorite, is a ceremony that is a gift given to a baby the first time it laughs. It's almost a competition to try to see who can make him laugh, but the salt is a gift. And so by collecting the salt and bringing that back to the communities, we can keep this tradition alive. Next slide. Archaeologically speaking, this is cultural resources have been the main purpose of looking at the artifacts and site forms that have been looked at through assemblages and how those are quantified for date of occupation in a site. This typically limits the traditional connection to those landscapes and the complex relationships of those. And what we hope to do is to change the rhetoric of what looks at the artifacts and the sites and actually contains the traditional connections of those. Next slide. As I said, we're trying to expand past just archaeological resources, and the ecological side of things are incredibly important. Native plant restoration is incredibly important and something we're looking at along the river on both sides of the dam, using traditional practices through the native plant program in the Fish and Wildlife Department in the Navajo Nation. We also are looking at animals, including bighorn sheep, as you see here. Last year, we were trying to see whether or not there was a pneumonia that's transferred between domestic and bighorn sheep that's causing a lot of sterilization of females. We ended up seeing upwards of 80 bighorn sheep with lots of babies that year, which was a really good sign for us. So we're trying to understand what those look like in the future in the Grand Canyon. Next slide. Traditional practices. As I said, we stop and collect different resources, but there are also ceremonial stops for offerings. We stop and collect things like water. I collected this from a spring above the dam this last fall and spring, and also visiting sites. We also visit the hematite mine to collect hematite that's used in a lot of pictographs that you see in the panel behind Nick here on the right. And so going to these places and talking about that connection reinvigorates that tradition and that knowledge. Next slide. Subsistence practices is something that's going to be incredibly important moving forward with all of the stressors that I said earlier. This is a site of a roasting pit down in the Grand Canyon. That roasting pit was used to roast different foods that grow in the landscape. And so learning and knowing and understanding that landscape and the connection to those resources can help create sustainability and resilience in the communities and the landscapes. Next slide. And finally, I think the most important, the aspect of kinship and education. Lots of things happen on these trips that are very scientific, but most of what happens is more about the connection and education. We learned how to make food, different stories, songs, the words, all of that education is really the main purpose of why we're down there. And it's hard to quantify those things, but it is a very primary and basic premise of our monitoring program moving forward. Next slide. So we're at a nexus here at the confluence of Little Colorado River and the Colorado River, thinking about all of the overlapping ecological and cultural understandings, all of the impacts to those things, and how we're going to move forward managing them. So when we think about a confluence and how we can move forward, we need to look at the river as a whole and understand that it's not just one location or one resource, but actually all of them together, connected to us and to each other. Next slide. And to do that, we need to actually create a product to be able to monitor and manage those. So that's the second strand of our monitoring protocol, knowledge as a product. So while we're on these river trips, I'm taking lots of notes and points and the data points on GIS databases and working through ethnographic reports throughout the rest of the year, this last year, to understand why these resources are important and how can we manage them moving forward. Next slide. And I've started to focus on traditional cultural properties, or TCPs. This is a recognized and designated location in the National Historic Preservation Act, established that the National Park Service is in charge of protecting those locations under the National Register of Historic Places. Those are submitted by either state or tribal historic preservation offices. And once they're either listed or deemed eligible, the National Park Service guides evaluation, documenting, and listing those to the National Register Bulletin. Those then can get provided federal resources to preserve those locations or future development actions in the that can be limited through state and tribal laws. Next slide. So not only can those be a site or a building, but they can be an area or location. I've been working, like I said, over the last year to establish different databases to try and define those TCPs. Here is the confluence of the Little Colorado River. And as you can see, there are many, many different overlapping locations. So what I'm hoping to do is to establish this kind of database to instigate either consultation or collaboration with tribal communities and tribal governments to understand what the impacts are to potential future impacts or management decisions with the Glen Canyon Dam. Next slide. The one I focused the most on was the river. And this is I used below the dam. The USGS has defined the river corridor based off of different high flow marks. So the work's already been done and ground truthed. So I'm hoping to utilize that as an established high flow mark with up to a 210,000 CFS mark as what the river corridor would be. This is going to be hard to do for the entire river, which spans from all the way the headwaters to the ocean, but at least we can establish it for this region because the data is already available. Next slide. So what I hope to do moving forward, as I leave on this trip today, I'm hoping to continue to work on reconnecting the river. The biggest thing that I've been pushing over the last few months is extending above the dam. As I said, the program manages below Glen Canyon Dam on the impacts of how it's managed, not above the dam. The reservoir or anything above the reservoir is outside of the jurisdiction within our program, but the impacts are combined. And so what I'm hoping to do is continue working to expand that scope along the Northern Nation into the San Juan River and Lake Powell. With that, I'm going to also continue working on expanding the programs to include different research, assessments, and outreach for future Glen Canyon Dam adaptive management considerations to include the voices of the Navajo Nation. I am working with different people on film and audio documentation. We have Nizoni Films working on the filming, New York Times and National Geographic helping with photos, and the NPS and Bureau of Reclamation helping with funding to establish some sort of a archive for the future education and sensitivity trainings. And finally, I hope to continue research and engage Navajo Nation community members that want to have a voice in land management. Next slide. So with that, I have so many thanks to so many people, but I want to thank everyone at the Navajo Nation Heritage and Historic Preservation Department, in particular, Eric Stanfield, who's my advisor and supported me endlessly through everything and made all of my connections possible. Richard Begay, the TIPO at my department, thank you so much for trusting me and allowing me to have the vision. My faculty member, MJ, thank you for trusting me and allowing me to also do everything I can with my project. And I got lots of help from so many other people and plenty of help with funding from both the Haley Foundation, Western Water and Assessments, and lots of others. Thank you so much for all your help, and I'll take any questions.
Q&A, questions? Space for some questions, maybe at distance, there are some questions. But yet, I'm here, yes.
I've got a question for you, Jojo. I was wondering if some of the recent negotiations that are reopening up around drought and water allocation with the Colorado River, is that kind of opening up the door for bringing in more like native voices into the allegations of the water, kind of moving forward?
I wish I worked more with water rights because I nerd out about it on a regular basis. But in my understanding, yes, it is opening up the conversation. The 2007 interim guidelines didn't include Indigenous water rights, quantified or unquantified. And I think that there's a lot of effort moving forward to include both quantified and unquantified water rights in how water is used and allocated moving forward.
One more, I think there was, yeah.
I was just curious about there was a slide that had a bunch of some maps and some different sites identified. I'm just curious about more of like the meaning of that slide, of the complexity there. Could you maybe shed some light a bit more on the complexity of having those like different sites and somewhere in the little Colorado, somewhere in the big Colorado? I don't know if that question makes sense, but this is all kind of new for me.
Yeah, so that slide, that database, like I said, I'm taking TCPs, traditional cultural properties, and defining what those are based off of ethnographic inquiry. So if it's the canyon, goes from the rim down, right? And that area then is something that, like I said, overlaps in that one confluence in particular. You see a lot of overlapping cultural connection to individual locations and then the location as a whole. And so by establishing the actual boundaries of those, creating it is not easy because boundaries are subjective, but establishing some sort of a understanding of what that looks like can create an avenue of, if a location is going to get developed, like a dam that keeps getting proposed within the Little Colorado River, if it impacts multiple layers of cultural connection to different resources, then that instigates a higher level of need to consult with tribal nations on, is that acceptable, or what that looks like moving forward. So if I can help create that database, maybe we can instigate more conversations to have better learning moving forward on why something needs to be protected.
Thank you very much.
All right, and next we have Kat Finnerty in her presentation, No Light in a Dark Place.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Like Catherine said, my name is also Catherine, also Kat, and my project was all about the dark sky, and the dark sky specifically in South Florida. So where did it all begin? In February of last year, I headed down to Big Cypress National Preserve. And for those of you who don't know, Big Cypress National Preserve is a unit of the National Park Service, sits right on top of the Everglades. It encompasses 729,000 acres of land and provides a multitude of opportunities for recreation. Because it's a preserve and not a park, there's a little bit looser regulation as far as that. I also went down I went down as a community volunteer ambassador, which is a program under AmeriCorps, under Conservation Legacy. I took the position because I thought it would be a good opportunity to live in a place that I never thought I'd live and just experience an ecosystem that I had no experience with before. And I could not have been more right. It was an amazing opportunity for me, not only to just get to experience something different, but also to do my MEM project. I thought that I would do a project maybe on greenhouse gases. That was not the direction that I ended up taking, obviously. And that was partially because of these night excursions or night cruises that my roommates and I would often go on. A night cruise in South Florida is essentially driving around the back roads of the preserve looking for snakes and frogs and other small mammals, nocturnal animals that you don't typically get to see. My roommate happened to stop at the Education Trail. It's a 1 mile round or 1 mile loop that takes you through swamp, prairie, and into a pineland. We ended up stopping in the middle of the prairie, looking up at the stars, and my roommate, who is also the night sky coordinator for that year, gave us his whole star presentation. Was it maybe not super entertaining? Yes, but it was an amazing experience to be out there between two bunches of trees blocking light domes and just having a sky full of stars. Big Cypress is an international dark sky park. We were designated in 2016 by the International Dark Sky Association. And it takes a lot to be a dark sky park. It takes a lot of dedication and work from my coworker who's still at the preserve. So what does it take? Like I said, it takes a lot, but I've kind of narrowed it down to 4 overarching rules, quote unquote. And the first is that you're required to have a commitment to the dark skies. So what does that mean? What is a commitment? That means you're involved in the community, getting the word out about the International Dark Sky Association, but also about light pollution. That means doing education programs, outreach programs, et cetera, and proving that you do them with photos and things like that. It means that you are dedicated to having 100% night sky friendly lighting within the boundaries of the park. Big Cypress is still working on that, which I will talk about in a moment, but it also includes lighting outside of the park. So Big Cypress is settled between 2 really big urban hubs, Miami on the east and Naples on the west. And because of that, designation is maybe questionable. Whenever we were first getting designated, people didn't know if that was going to happen for us because of the light domes caused by those cities. But we're fortunate enough that they're close enough to the horizon that they don't impact the quality of our night skies. The third piece is the park is required to have a lighting management plan. And that plan essentially lays out, this is where we're at right now with our lighting. This is where we want to be, and this is how we're going to get there. Big Cypress has one. You're supposed to have it completed within 5 years of designation. Excuse me. But with COVID and stuff, things get hectic. So we have not fully completed our plan. That is in the works. Finally, you have to have a yearly report. You submit this every year to the International Dark Sky Association, and it includes evidence about the 3 things I just mentioned, as well as what we call sky quality meter data. And that's those in the preserve we collected at 9 different locations, indicated by the yellow dots. I hope people can see it. And it takes approximately 4 to 5 hours to get through all of the locations in the preserve. It's definitely a commitment, and you take those every month during the week of the new moon, ideally on the night where it's going to be least cloudy. And so my role, I collected sky quality meter data every month in the preserve. We had a couple where I didn't get the data, one being September, Hurricane Ian hit right during the week of the new moon, so I missed that data. I also worked with the communities surrounding us. I did 4 youth education programs and talked with so many people, community members, landowners within the preserve, people from different parks trying to figure out what we could do better as a preserve. I worked with the night sky coordinator, and we talked to maintenance about getting the Big Cypress lighting management plan back up and running. Like I said, ours kind of got put on hold because of COVID and staffing issues. So the goal is to have the lighting management plan fully completed by the end of this year. And then finally, I completed a lighting management plan for Everglades City. Everglades City is the closest small town to Big Cypress. It's a town heavily saturated with ecotourism, but only during the day. They miss out a lot on what's after dark, right? So I'm hoping that that plan that I created gets put into working order. So my project really had two main pieces to it. The first was that passion piece. What caused me to pick this as my project? And that was through my interactions with nature. This picture, you're probably wondering why I put such a terrible picture as the background, but I promise it has a story. This is on a road going up to a place we call Bear Island. It's one of the places I take sky quality meter data. And it was the first time I was going out there by myself, the second time I was collecting. And I'm driving up this road, and all of a sudden a black bear tears out of the pineland. And so this little tiny black dot right there is the black bear that I saw. It was the first one I saw in the preserve, and only one of 3 that I've seen since. So that was pretty awesome. The other pictures on the bottom are all of animals that require the dark in some capacity. They require the full amount of dark, a full, 12 hours? Whether that be because that's when they're most active and that's when they eat, that's when they reproduce, or like the sea turtles on the bottom left, for all of you, they require the moon in order to find their way into the ocean. The other piece is, how do we get to where we want to go? And that's through interactions with people. That's through working with community. That's through educating the future generations. This is one of our night sky programs, as well as that one that was done at the grade school and the zoo. I worked with community members at the landowners meeting within the preserve. I also worked with our volunteers who have a lot of direct interactions with the visiting public. And then we also had star parties, which are these 2 pictures on the sides. And that we had 400 people at our last star party this year. They come from all across the state, all across the country, just to see the dark skies in Big Cypress. So what comes next? I'm actually headed back to Big Cypress. I got back down there a month ago. I was hired full-time as a park ranger there. So I'm hoping to continue with my project. I want to continue working with Everglades City and ideally get them the designation of an international dark sky community. And I, of course, like I mentioned before, I want to see that Big Cypress lighting management plan all the way to completion by the end of the year. I have so many people to acknowledge. I was helped so much along the way. Jesse Baker, my faculty mentor, thank you for trusting me and giving me the advice when I needed it. Lori Maroy, my community sponsor, for getting me to where I needed to go. Scott Purdue and Lisa Andrews, my boss and very close coworker, for whom without I would not be back at the preserve. Huge thanks to them. Big Cypress for letting me do my project, using them as a base. Immokalee and Manatee Middle, Naples Zoo for letting me do projects, and then all of the people that I talked to, Everglades City community members, landowners, the public, for just hearing me out, hearing what I had to say. It means a lot. Questions? Yeah.
Related to the certifications, is there any sort of attention paid to potentially light pollution during the day, maybe from like solar energy or any reflective services, or maybe not at like peak daylight hours, but like dawn and dusk where there could potentially be?
So you're asking if there's concern for light pollution during the day? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
Not Not particularly. Dawn and dusk, definitely. The use of timers is really encouraged by the International Dark Sky Association because you can set it to go off as soon as light comes, like as soon as the sun goes down. But as far as during the day, no. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
How many different dark sky parks are there? Because I think the Black Canyon is one, but other than that, I've never heard of it before.
I don't have a number. There are a lot. It's not just dark sky parks in the United States. It's also it's an international association. So there's some in Ireland, Germany, all across the world. Our partner park is in South Korea, I think. So that's kind of cool. Maybe one day I'll get to go. We'll see. Anyone else?
And with that, we can leave this meeting.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicholas Story, and today I'm going to be talking about natural resource damage assessment for oil spills in the Niger Delta. But first, a little bit of background. For almost 4 years now, I've been working for the Bodo Remediation and Revegetation Project. This is in the eastern Niger Delta of Nigeria. 1,000 hectares of mangrove habitat were damaged due to 2 oil spills in 2008. This is the largest oil spill to ever happen in mangrove habitat. To complicate the matter, there's been continual oiling from illegal theft and refining of oil. So every step we take is maybe a step backwards sometimes. For those of you unfamiliar, this is an illegal refinery. You can see there's quite a lot of damage around the area. And some of these are quite large. This one's about the size of a football field. Now, the Bodo project is the result of litigation. The Bodo community sued Shell Oil, and that's why I'm there now. Okay, they won. My role there has been as the shoreline cleanup assessment technique team leader. I manage a team of 40+ people with the objective to monitor and verify remediation contractor work. I have an active seat on the Project Management Council. I'm in charge of planning, overseeing, and tracking all the field operations out there. And I also do a lot of capacity building with community representatives, as well as United Nations Environmental Program and many other people. What is natural resource damage assessment? In the United States, it's a trustee-led process that evaluates and restores lost natural resources due to a hazardous spill. Okay, this is triggered under CERCLA and the Oil Pollution Act when an oil spill occurs, and it's comprised of determining baseline conditions like what naturally exists in the environment. It's quantifying the ecosystem services losses, scaling compensatory restoration projects to match that loss, and choosing which project option best fits and implements it. But before we get into all that, let's talk about the difference between primary and compensatory restoration. So primary restoration is remediation actions to restore the area to a baseline condition. For a beach that has been oiled, the primary restoration action is essentially to remove the oiled sediment and replace it. Okay? Now, the focus of natural resource damage assessment is compensatory restoration. That's what we're really going to be focusing on here today. And these are restoration actions to compensate the public for services lost from the time of the incident, from the time of the spill, to when the injured area returns to baseline conditions. So for that same beach, this would be in addition to primary restoration. Say maybe a mile down, there's some eroded shoreline. What we have to do is evaluate the ecosystem services loss for the whole duration that beach experienced ecosystem services loss. So the question is, what is the value over time of the ecosystem services loss? And for that, we use habitat equivalency analysis. So the objective of this is to determine the scale of compensatory restoration projects, right? For these two, we have to essentially first do these first 2 bullets, which is assess and estimate the duration and extent of injury until baseline conditions are reached. And we also have to assess and estimate services provided by primary restoration. So this is losses from the spill incident, and it's gains from the primary restoration efforts, right? From those, we can calculate the size of the compensatory restoration action as well as the cost. In general, the faster a primary restoration happens, the smaller the compensatory restoration action, okay? Now, for the BOTA project, I use a software called Visual HEA. Now, this just performs habitat equivalency analysis. The actual equations for habitat equivalency analysis are quite complex, and I'm very glad to have this software, so I didn't have to do that. There are many parameters needed for visual habitat equivalency analysis. I'm not going to go over all of them, but we need to determine the size of the impact. We need to look at the rate of gains from primary restoration, maybe natural recovery, right? The important thing to understand here is that informed and defensible assumptions are needed. So everything that goes into this algorithm, right, needs to be backed up by scientific understanding. But why is this needed in Nigeria? Well, it doesn't exist like it does in the US. Oil spill response and primary restoration is very slow over there. Claimants for oil spills wait years for settlement or response efforts to occur, and many times resort to international courts, right? These court cases take a really long time to finalize. And during that whole period, the area remains contaminated. Why that liability is determined. We were talking about the illegal activities earlier. Who cleans those up? Right? No one wants to clean up something that's not their responsibility. Right? And no one has until recently, but that's a whole other subject that would take me down a crazy tangent. So I'm not going to talk about that. So if another operational oil spill occurs, like by the actual oil company, incorporating compensatory restoration can help address oil affected areas where liability is concerned, because in compensatory restoration, we can include these illegal refinery areas. Now let's get right into the habitat equivalency analysis. First, I had to quantify the mangrove habitat injury. We did a lot of ground truthing out there, and we also did a satellite imagery analysis. Everything in gray here was former mangrove. All right, this is all completely barren now. Some of it has been restored, some of it has been planted with mangroves at this point, but it's still ongoing. In total, we had 988.6 hectares affected by this oil spill. Now, we also have to understand the rate of gains from primary restoration. So I looked at the phases to make my assumptions. So the spill occurred in 2008. During phase one, we had the initial cleanup of free phase oil, that's just oil floating in the water, and minor sediment flushing, right? That took 2.5 years. For phase two, we had intense sediment flushing, which you can see up in this photo up there. They're sticking the nozzle into the sediment column at high tide. The oil rises out of the sediment column, and then it's collected and taken away. And then for phase three, it's the planting and monitoring of just about 2 million mangrove seedlings, which occurs between 2022, it's supposed to end this year. So I had to make many assumptions. Year of the claims, 2008. I assumed that before the oil spills that the ecosystem services were at 100%. Of the 988.6 hectares that were affected, I assumed that there was a 90% loss of ecosystem services. For phase one, between 2017 and 2019, I assumed a 5% total gain in services from primary restoration. For phase two, I did it for 5% gain per year because a lot had happened at that point in time, right? A lot of things have already been restored, natural resources are coming back. For phase two, for the end of phase 2 and 3, which is supposed to be this year, I assumed a 10% gain in services from primary restoration actions. So mangroves typically mature within a 20 to 25 year timeline. So I assume that mangrove maturity equals recovery to baseline conditions. Also, I co-authored a study with Dr. Gunlack, and we found out that there was some natural recovery happening at a rate of 5% gain for every 7 years. Now, this is what all those assumptions look like in a graphical format. Right, so on the top, we have the service losses from the spill and natural recovery. On the bottom, we have the gains from primary restoration actions. So you can see an initial drop in the service loss from 90 to 10%, and then gains from natural recovery up top. It would take, according to this linear rate of gain, that's about 130 years for natural recovery to occur in this area. In the bottom, for phases 1 through 3, we have a baseline of 10%. It goes to 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, and 10 to equal 40%. And then we have this, this right here is the mangrove recovery after seedlings have been placed. So after 20 years at a 3% growth rate per year, that equals 60% services. 40% plus 60% equals 100% equals baseline conditions. So I don't really want to get too much into the results in here. The calculation is difficult. These slides are hidden in this document if anyone does want to see them. But the scale of the compensatory restoration project that we determined for the habitat equivalency analysis was 1,377.8 hectares. Now, for those of you who are paying attention, that's larger than the actual project size itself, right? So why did that happen? The reason behind that is that it took a really long time for response and primary restoration actions to happen, right? So if initial response and primary restoration efforts took place at a faster rate, the scale of this restoration project would be much smaller. Now, this is a motivator in Nigeria for oil companies essentially to respond much more quickly to reduce their liability, right? So if we had compensatory restoration over there, the longer they wait, the more they would have to do. Right? Also, if they did take a long time, there would be potential for other damage areas like these illegal refineries to be, a part of the remediation process, right? So overall, incorporating the natural resource damage assessment into Nigerian law can help motivate quick oil spill response action and restore areas where liability is in question. Also, as a side note, this was just one of the resources affected by the spill. This is not accounting for fish loss, for benthic loss, bird loss. Habitat equivalency analysis can be confirmed on all this. I just don't have the data, right? So that would have increased the size of the compensatory restoration. Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge Dr. Eric Gunlack, who has been my mentor for over a decade now, and he's really guided me throughout my whole career process. Dr. Micah Russell, I've been very fortunate to have you. Thank you so much. Dr. Jessica Young, I wish she was here, but Sally could pass on those regards. Dr. Young provided me a lot of professional and emotional support, like throughout my whole tenure here. It's been almost 4 years since I started this program, so there's been a lot of ups and downs, and thank you both for letting me share right in place. I appreciate it. Dr. Crosley for helping me with GIS and drone issues or drone stuff, and Dr. Luke Danielson for giving me some consultation advice for working internationally. I also received a grant from Margie and John Haley for the multispectral drone sensor that you should all have access to now. So thank you, Margie and John Haley. Any questions?
What challenges, but also kind of the uniqueness have you experienced working in an international setting compared to in the US?
This is a very unique setting. International is broad. Let's just talk about Africa, right? There's a lot of things, there's a lot of cultural things that you really need to understand, right? So you've got to get to know these little idiosyncrasies, how people even talk, right? A lot of people, it's common for people just yell at each other and then 5 minutes later, they're the best friends. Right, so it was like, oh, okay, we'll shake your hand. There's also like adaptive management has been the MO for this whole project. There's always something shifting and changing. So it's reacting. It's a lot of reacting, unfortunately. I wish I could plan for all these little weird things in advance, but there's always some kind of demand. There's always some kind of thing that is, causing you to lose your hair. So it's been a very interesting experience, and I encourage you to try it, at least see if you like it. Yeah, it's been a great experience. You want? Yeah.
So 1,000 hectares is a large area. That's like it's like 1 million, 10 million square meters, I think. It's either 1 million or 10 million. You mentioned a bit on the last slide about other species and ecosystem losses. How are the people that you're working with and the people in the community relating to the loss of species? Is that something that's talked about or related to closely, or is it like kind of ignored because it's too painful?
So there was an unpublished study a few years ago that essentially determined whether or not there would be a health risk to eat the fish in the area, which it came out positive, right? You can eat the fish in the area. It has impacted fishermen, right? This is like fishing is the main staple. It's the main sustenance in this area. So a lot of the fishermen, they're eager to have it done with, so the fish start coming back. You know, one of the things that has happened from this project with all this, you know, heavy flushing into the sediment column is there's been a lot of erosion. So a lot of the fishermen have been complaining that the channels are not deep enough for the larger fish species to come up because the water's not cool, right? So there have been some issues that we've had to address along the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Section of Q&A for the panel, so you can bring your questions for the four panelists, and we have at distance Jojo. So welcome questions. We have more space for questions and answers. You can ask to any of them.
I had a question for the panel. A lot of you did very community-based work, and I often have found that community timelines and academic timelines don't line up very well. I'm just curious how you all went about kind of navigating the differences of academic pace versus community-paced work.
For me, it was definitely a challenge. As Catherine can attest, government, anything moves about the speed of a snail. So I just kind of accepted that I wasn't going to get everything done, and that was just how it was going to be. Now that I get to go back, I'm excited to get to do the things that I didn't get to do because of the slow speed. But that was it for me. Just take it one day at a time.
Yeah, and as I kind of mentioned during my presentation, it was hard to get out to the islands for most of the winter months. So that kind of lined up well because I finished my last course. And then once that was done, I was finally able to start planning trips out to the islands. So there was kind of a balance there, but I did end up finishing my field work like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I was, you know, took me almost 4 years to finish this, right? I definitely hit a peak of stress where I was working, 12-hour days, and then there's an 8-hour time difference here. So I was trying to attend classes, and that was difficult. And then with the community, there's been all kinds of different upheavals, right? There's been a lot of propaganda out there, just from all sides. There's a lot of political division in the community, right? So this has, the reason I'm here right now is because the project's suspended because they can't figure out who their leaders are. They're working on that right now. So that's sort of, the silver lining. I get to be here with you. But after this, I'm going back, and we'll see what happens. Yep.
For me, I've had a very steep learning curve, an adaptive management program itself with different cultures, with different timelines and different expectations. That itself has been hard to navigate, but primarily trying to focus on engaging with the right community members in the right places. It takes a lot of time and relationship building that doesn't fit timelines for an adaptive management protocol. So I think what I'm learning is that any information is good information. So whatever I have from the community, like giving that voice and making that known, which creates respect or rapport that establishes more engagement, because we think everything needs to be done at a particular time, which that's my MO. And so having to be more flexible to being slower has been a very steep learning curve, but something I actually think is more important with management, and I embrace it.
We have one more question here. That's it. Oh, Sally, please.
Okay, you all have kind of indicated that you've done several things and you're going back. You're going to return. You're going to do further work. Can you tell us why? What capacity? Give these first-year students an idea of, what the possibilities are. Why are you going back?
I've been working on this thing for such a long time. We're 6-8 months away from pretty much wrapping it up. I want to see this through, and I get paid pretty well, so.
I will be going back to the Channel Islands because they are just one of the most magical places, and this work that we're doing is, I've just kind of started it, and so it's hard for me to just let that go. I kind of feel like it's my duty to continue this monitoring work and see where I can take it.
Definitely on that, falling in love with the place, falling in love with the project. Both happened during the duration of mine. I love where I am. I love what I do. I love the night sky. And so going back is just a no-brainer.
For me, I'm going to echo a lot of what Kat just said. Working on the Colorado River, the San Juan River is a no-brainer for me. To try to protect water is a no-brainer for me. But I'm going back primarily because the opportunities I had with this program and with my sponsors, the Navajo Nation HHPD, hired me on for the year to continue my work. I got a BIA grant for my contract, so I'm excited to be able to continue my work and hopefully expand into other avenues with work as well, which is incredibly exciting.
One or two more questions, please. Yeah.
So I'm curious about all these data sets. It sounds like many of you had multiple data sets, and how you're navigating, creating conversation across all these data sets, and how we can have more visibility.
Well, my data sets are extremely, I can't give them out. Yeah, it's because it's litigation associated with like corporation, like I only can give it to like approved sources, honestly. So it's unfortunate, but I'd like to.
Yeah, and the data for my monitoring projects is also mostly internal, and the point of it is just to inform the management team so that they can make the adaptive decisions to protecting the resources for the park.
I'm gonna echo mine's internal, but my internal work is with the hopes of creating platforms for education and outreach, both with the National Park Service at the park, the Grand Canyon Park, communities across the Navajo Nation, chapters, kids programs, education programs across the nation. So that's the scope of the future of it. What that looks like will be dependent on what I do with it all. But yeah, I think that having some flexibility to have it be adaptable with how the data can be used to be educational and informative.
Yeah, let me follow that up a little bit. So, while I can't just give out data sets, there have been a lot of publications that have gone out around this project. So, you can just look up, on Google Scholar, look up Bodo, Nigeria, and there's going to be a lot of publications that actually define what we have done, outline all the manuals, all the types of different things that we have done. So, they are available. They just have to go through a vetting process, like through various lawyers.
One more.
Kat, I was wondering, so I'm pretty relatively familiar with the South Florida area, and I'm wondering if you found some resistance, were people saying who cares? And if so, how did you approach that?
Yeah, definitely. Florida is a very different political climate than a lot of other places I've been. But you would be surprised at the people, at least the people that I interacted with. The general public was a bit of a challenge for sure. A little bit of resistance there, but as far as people who own land within the preserve and the community surrounding, they live there and have that land because they love the ecosystem, because they love the animals in it. So while there was some pushback and was some, why do we need to do this? Really, I had probably 95% support. So that was really encouraging for me, for sure.
Thank you. With this answer, now we have time for refreshment break. There are some refreshment there, snacks, and we will be back here 9:43, 2 minutes before we start sharp on 9:45. I ask you to be in your seats 2 minutes before so that we can start sharp. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
I would like to say goodbye to everybody. Like I said, I'm leaving on my third shift, so. Thank you. Good luck, everybody.